Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Chocolate Life Live for Friday, January the 14th, 2022. I'm doing something a little bit different today in the sense that this is part one of a two-part series. And also today, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be the host and the presenter. There are no guests this week. There will be guests in part two. Now, before we begin, I'm going to play the introduction. We're going to give people a little more time to come into the room, into the session, and I'll be back on the other side of the break to take us through the next hour, where we'll be talking about the USDA, IESC, Global and Dominican Republic cocoa studies. Well, hello, everyone. And what I want to start off today's session today is lead everybody through a couple of housekeeping notes. The first one of which is that for every one of these live streams on TheChocolateLife.com, what I do is I post a story. And so here is the post for this week's live stream. And you'll see that as a part of the information that is presented there, what you'll do in this case is there are the two reports we're going to be covering today, the global market study and the Dominican Republic study. And then there's also a link, which hopefully you have found if you're here watching this morning, as well as some other information that you can have about going to YouTube, watching the archive of these videos, and then the idea that if you are a member, or the opportunity that if you are a member of TheChocolateLife.com, you can comment on these stories. Now, I want to let you know that a lot of what it is that I'm going to do today is based on a presentation that I've created based on some analysis of my reading of these two studies. And after today's stream is over, what it is that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be adding to this section here. I'm going to be adding the presentation itself is a PDF. So what you can do is you can download it and you can have it, and you can view it on your own computer screen in case you're having some challenges reading what it is that is on screen here, right? During the presentation. I also want to point out that there is a comment stream, right? And that I can see. And so if you are watching this on YouTube, or you're watching it on Facebook, or you're watching it on LinkedIn, what you can do is you can type comments and ask questions. And those comments and questions I can see them. So for example, we know that Mark and Yuri at Blue Scoots Chocolate who have commented already, as well as Barbie Van Horn, who's in Seattle. And so what I can do is I can present your comments and your questions on screen, right? And we can go through them. What I also want to say is that, again, this is the first part of a two-part series. And so I have invited two of the primary investigators, so Mariana de la Rosa and Marika van Satfort of Gaia Cacao, who are named as the principal, or Gaia Cacao is named as the principal investigator on these two studies. And they will be joining us 2 weeks from today. So that's Friday, January 28th. But at a starting time of 10 a.m. And the reason why we're starting at 10 a.m. is because there's a 6-hour time difference between New York, where I am, and Amsterdam, where they are both located. And so we want to make sure that, we're both, within the working day next Friday. So the idea here today is I will present some of my thoughts on the over 350 pages that these two studies comprise. Encourage you to download these two studies for yourself, to be able to send me questions or comments either here in the live stream or on thechocolatelife.com, after things are over. And that, some comments down here, so that what I can do is I can share these comments and questions with Mariana and Marika. I will also share with them the presentation, and I hope that they're watching today. They told me that they both would be. So that what they can do is they can respond to the points that I make, and they can respond to your questions and the comments that you might make today or over the course of the next couple of weeks. So with all of that, what I just wanted to do is say thanks everybody for joining us, and let's jump in to the presentation that I want to make today. And again, I downloaded these studies, a month ago or more, and I've had an opportunity to read through them on a number of occasions and form some thoughts and impressions about what it is that they contain. And so let's jump into it. I think it's important to start off like what I want to achieve, right, in this presentation. And, there are 350 plus pages in these two presentations. There are, over 400, bibliographic references. And so, trying to go through these two presentations with any level of detail or specificity is going to be impossible within the course of an hour. And so focusing on some high level observations and identify some key insights that might be actionable, that if you're a chocolate maker or you're involved in the cocoa and chocolate industry, you can take away from this presentation, but they provide points that you can go to as you're reading the studies themselves and get some more information for yourself and think about them, right? So I also think in reading it that there are some areas of some undisclosed and accidental bias on the part of the authors. And this is in part, I think, due to there's an advisor, a high-level advisor in these two studies, which is the Fine Cocoa and Chocolate Institute. And I think that there is some bias which comes through as a result of that. And I'll point those out in particular places when I get through. And there are some areas where I think clarification and follow-up needs to be done. And we'll discuss a couple of those as we go through. And so I'm going to start off with the Global Cocoa Study. And we'll quickly take a look at the cover page for the Global Cocoa Study. Here it is, showing it up in preview on the Macintosh. I want to start off by saying that this kind of research is incredibly difficult to do, even in the best of circumstances. But when we're talking about doing this in a time where there are travel restrictions due to COVID, that getting the kind of information that you want to have, especially that which needs to be collected firsthand, is much more difficult than it is in normal times. If you think about the background research that needs to get done, the research reports and the studies that need to get looked at, when you have a body of them, which is more than 400, being able to read through those 400 studies to be able to compare, for example, what it is that the International Cocoa Organization says and what FAO says. I mean, this requires just an enormous amount of dedication and attention to detail to do well. And up front, I want to recognize that this represented a really monumental task. It was done in a very, very short period of time, a compressed window. I believe it started in April of 2021, and the report was presented for the first time in December, so 6 months or thereabouts, which is just phenomenal. I took a look at the terms of reference, which is the original request for quote, which was put together, and I have to say that I am impressed with the work that the principal investigators and the entire team did in putting this together. It's just really, 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 really amazing, and I want to thank everybody for doing that. Who is involved in it. It's just really, really quite remarkable. I mean, I took a look at it with a colleague of mine, and we realized that we really didn't have access to all of the resources which would be necessary to put this together. And so I have to thank Marianne, Marika, her team, everybody at the International Executive Service Corps, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, FCCI, and places like that who contributed to the study. So the first thing I want to do is I want to sort of summarize what I think of as the key objectives. There are 10 in the original study, and I think that there are you can simplify them to some extent into 5, which is, we're going to assess the cocoa and chocolate, the evolution of the cocoa and chocolate industry over the past 25 years. What we want to do is we want to take a look at current market trends and future market trends and be able to identify opportunities that might exist, not just globally, but regionally. So, within the Americas, within the Caribbean, within Africa, we want to look within Indonesia, we want to look at these market trends and how they might differ from one part of the world to another part of the world. There's also a lot of complexity and I think confusion and lack of understanding around, what drives price of cocoa. What are the market drivers? What are the dynamics? What are the dynamics with respect to cocoa beans, cocoa nibs, and cocoa butter, cocoa powder? I'm not going to get into the dynamics of those markets today. Number one is because it would require more than the length of this 1 hour in order to be able to talk about all of them. We also, they want to identify some of the challenges that exist in the marketplace. Who are the competitors in the marketplace? Talk about the companies and not so much people, but the companies that are involved in different parts of the market. And then, although they say determine, I really think it's probably better to say to make recommendations for sustainable strategies. I don't think that any single report can determine the strategies for a $10 billion cocoa sector and a $100 billion chocolate sector. But what they can do is they can make recommendations for these strategies. And I believe that these are the key objectives of the global cocoa study. Now, in reading and rereading the studies, there are a couple of things which I think are incredibly important. The first one of which is that this study is freely available. There is a lot of syndicated market research and custom market research that is private client market research that is done, that is generally either extremely expensive. You might pay $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 to get your hand on a study like this, or that it is done by a private company and is only available to the private company. The fact that these reports are freely available. I mean, you can go to TheChocolateLife.com and you can download them from my website. You can go to the website associated with this project and be able to download them there as well. I think that another key strength of the study is helping understand a structure of the marketplace. So, how is it organized is really important. Some terminology. And in this study, there's a glossary, which is an index of acronyms for the most part, so that you can understand, number one, as you're reading it, what these acronyms refer to, but also to give you a really much more detailed understanding of who the players are and where influences might come. Right? There's a typology, which is if you're going to divide up the market into segments. What you want to do is you want to not only identify what those segments are, but also identify key attributes of those segments. And I think that this typology is really, really important, because when it comes to, for example, the specialty chocolate world, a specialty chocolate is a term that I prefer over craft chocolate or artisan chocolate. There are connections between specialty coffee and specialty cocoa that I think that we can make. And so I really think that the typology helps us understand what that is. And there are some statistics. So how big is the market? And we'll go into some of those key statistics in another slide. There's also a really, really wonderful set of tables which talk about the classification and giving you, important market data that you might not have thought of. So, for example, what are the HS, which are basically the customs codes, the harmonized standard codes for goods for cocoa, cocoa derivatives, and chocolate products. So if you are trading internationally, knowing what the harmonized standard codes are should be something that you have readily at hand, so you understand what they are, and understand that to some extent, the harmonized standard code will determine if there is import duties on the goods you may be bringing in or goods you may be exporting. So really, really important. I think that within the global cocoa market study, that the exploration of the various regional markets, and I say these are pages 52 to 58 of the study, is also just, really, really quite illuminating, and is one of the strengths, because again, unless you are buying a syndicated market research study, which is specifically designed to look at this kind of information, you don't have ready access to that information. And if you try to do this research online, that what you do is you get a lot of conflicting reports. And one of the challenges that you have is being able to say, okay, which one of these reports or which one of these sets of statistics are ones that I need to pay attention to. And then the bibliography. I mean, being able to go through and like have the references. In many cases, these research reports are available through service like archive.archive, ARXIVE, which is a preprint server. They might be available at ResearchGate and a bunch of other places. So if you can go or Google Scholar even maybe, you can download the research reports and you can go take a look at the underlying data and underlying opinions which the authors of the study and the principal investigators had to go through in order to be able to arrive at at the recommendations and the observations that they made. And, when it comes right down to it, I mean, just like, oh my gosh, I mean, I have a personal research library that's like over 1,200 research reports, and I don't have, even, a significant percentage of the ones that are here. And so I'm going to be looking to find as many of these I can so that I can use them in my own research. And the bibliography is just hugely important as far as I'm concerned. Right. Any study is not perfect. And there are a couple of things that I would like. I mean, these are, this is quibbling for the most part. So one of which is that I would have liked an abstract or summary of key findings right at the front, right? And then with links to parts of the report that I could go through and do it. There are conclusions at the end, recommendations. I don't necessarily know that they're the same thing. But what I would have liked is to be able to have something right at the front, which said, here are some things that we found with links to go directly to that information. It would have helped with a study this size in order to be able to navigate it. And so that's something that I found to be missing. One of the things that I've talked a lot about on the Chocolate Life and the Clubhouse on Chocolate Life. The Chocolate Life on Clubhouse is around this notion of quality. And this is where I saw some bias creep in on both the global study and the Dominican Republic study, which is that, if you go to page 134 of the global market study, they will talk about the characterization of CCN 51 versus Ariba, right? And so they talk about CCN 51 as being of lower quality. And what I want to do is I want to thank Mark at Blue Spruce Chocolates, because he sent a comment to me this morning on thechocolateLife.com, which reported that in the recent concurso looking for the best cocoa in Ecuador, CCN 51 occupied, 2 of the top spaces. And so I think that there is a bias by the quote unquote fine cocoa and fine chocolate industry against CCN 51 that needs to be more clearly articulated. I think that bias was probably really, really applicable maybe 5 years ago, 7 years ago. I think it's less applicable now. And I think it needs to be re-examined. And I was disappointed to find that bias in this study. Right. So another place where I thought, given especially the attention that's being paid now on illegal child labor and slavery, and this is going to be a topic that I'm discussing next Friday, so a week from today, with Terry Collingsworth, who's the founder and executive director of International Rights Advocates. And International Rights Advocates is leading the lawsuits against Nestle and Cargill that went to the Supreme Court this past summer, as well as a new lawsuit in the District Court of the District of Columbia, which is wider in scope. These 2 lawsuits focus on different theories. So one of which is about standing, one of which is about another law, which is about knowingly taking advantage of illegal labor conditions, which is a different argument. But Terry and I are going to be talking about that next Friday. And, slavery is a topic. I've given you pages where there are references to illegal child labor, actually specifically the word slavery, in the global cocoa report, but that it's not really, I don't think it's adequately identified as a risk factor. And I think that the reason why that's important is, you may remember from 2 Fridays ago, so New Year's Eve, I had Don Carley of Nima Hunter, and we were talking about ESG and sustainability reporting and the European taxonomy. And I think that given the fact that these efforts exist, not to talk about the risks associated with not being able to know and report child labor or illegal child labor, slavery in your supply chain, is something that could have been discussed in a little more detail. And again, I apologize to the authors if it's there and I just missed it in the course of the report. I didn't see it, but if it's there, again, I mean, I have another room, which is 2 weeks from today. The 2 principal investigators will be there, and we'll get an opportunity to be able to go over these things and to be able to dive into deeper detail about some of the specific things that we talk about, that I bring up today. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing it today. I'm hoping that the people who are watching this, whether they're watching it live or they're watching it recorded, will go download the 2 studies. They can read them. They'll go download my presentation. They'll look things through and they'll add comments. And those comments will be visible not only by me, but also by Mariana and Marika. And they can look at them and they can incorporate them into their responses. So I'm really, really interested in understanding what people have to say about these topics. And I encourage people who are watching this live to go into the live chat or the comments on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook and send us a question or a comment about something that you might have heard today. I think the final weakness, and I don't necessarily know that this is something that you can do in the report, but there are a lot of graphs in both studies. And these graphs are sometimes have many, many different elements to them. So there might be 4 or 5 or 6 lines, and you've got different colored lines and different dots and dashes of lines, and they're very, very small. And sometimes the axes are very, very delineated in very, very small increments. And so you can get a rough idea of what the numbers are, but you don't actually know what the numbers are underlying them. And so not having the raw numbers that I could put into Excel or some other program to generate these graphs is something that I would encourage them to do. And I think it's something that the organizers of the kit, which is the Royal Tropical Institute in the Netherlands, did with their demystifying the cocoa sector in West Africa, is they made all of the underlying data available. So all of the numbers that were available so that people could open them up in whatever analytical program that they had and run their own analyses of them. And so I think that that's something that I missed here. And it may be that they just didn't have all that time. All right, so having gone that, what I want to do is I want to point out some things that I think that you, as somebody who's watching this, irrespective of where you are positioned in the cocoa and chocolate market globally, are things that you can do today. And I think one of them, page 20, right out the gate, definitions, right, and language, is that what the study does is it says, here is a segmentation of the cocoa market, right? We have commodity, bulk, and mainstream cocoa. And this is defined basically as whatever the market price is, whether it's in the New York Exchange or it's on the ICE Exchange in London. This is what is meant by commodity and bulk. Then you have the commodity or bulk certified. So this is any bulk cocoa, which is either has Rainforest Alliance or it's organically certified or it's fair trade certified. So it is whatever the market price is plus the premium. Right? And then a third segment of the marketplace is going to be premium. And then you have three sub-segments within the premium. So you have again a premium, which is a flavor bean, as opposed to a bulk bean, and it is certified. So it has, Rainforest Alliance. It is got fair trade certified. It is organically certified, but it is a flavor bean, right? What's interesting to know again is that these things are marked to market. And so whatever the market price is, then you add the premiums on top of it, right? To some extent, this premium category, the price, the underlying price of the bean, sometimes it's marked to the market, and sometimes it's completely decoupled. And this is especially true when we get to specialty and ultra premium, right? So what the definition of a specialty bean is, what the definition of an ultra premium bean means is very, very important to hear, right? In order to be able to justify this $3.50 to $6 a kilogram FOB price, which means at the port of export, as opposed to farm gate, right? As opposed to a delivered or landed or delivered price. So this is an FOB price, which means, at the port, getting ready to go. If you're familiar at all with the market, you might know FOB versus CIF, which includes insurance and freight, right? So, and that would be part of what we might call a landed price for these things. But I mean, none of these prices, and this is really important, is farm gate prices. And I think that as an industry, one of the things that we need to promote, we need to lobby on behalf of, is we need to have just generally a much better understanding of what the actual farm gate prices are, right? And the structure of them. And I'll talk a little bit about that under the typology section. So again, I think that, there is a definition of what quality means when it comes to ultra premium and things like that. But they do make a reference to the ICO classification system, and there is actually no link or footnote right there in the text, which says, oh, this is what it is. So, so in a PDF document, that hyperlink will be active and you can go straight to the reference. The lack of that reference, again, it's a quibble. I mean, it's a long study, thousands of words. But I really would have liked not to have to go search for that. I would have liked those definitions to be right there. And again, quality is a word is used inconsistently. High quality, low quality. Again, this is something that I have spent a lot of time talking about on the Chocolate Life. We had a number of rooms dedicated to this on Clubhouse. And the idea of quality is that there's a basket of attributes, that every buyer has a different collection of attributes in their basket, and they value those attributes differently. And so quality then is what attributes does a buyer value, and what are they willing to pay for cocoa that has those attributes that they value, right? And I think that there is no such thing as an absolute definition for quality. And so this is one of the words which talks about which suggests that there is a sort of again, I don't think it's a deliberate bias, but I don't think it was one that was actually edited out carefully enough, right, from the finished report. Again, given the amount of time they had, the number of resources they had available, and all that they were trying to do in a short period of time, I think I think they did a remarkable job doing it. It's just one of those things that, after the fact you go, oh yeah, okay, we could have edited it. Again, from Mark and Yuri at Blue Spruce. Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of information in the report. And one of the reasons why I'm doing this today is to hopefully provide some guidance into where you can go to look at some important things in the report. And we'll get to this issue of livable wage. And we've talked a little bit about sustainability. And if these are topics that interest you, coming back in 2 weeks and having a chance to interact with two of the authors of the study, I think is going to give you a really, really good chance to look at these areas of the study, read them, try to understand the implications of what's in the report, and then come back and ask some questions so that you get a more complete understanding. So the other thing, again, it's just language and terminology and structure. So I think that one of the most important typologies, and I noticed a typo because I did this morning and didn't have a chance to really sit back and edit it. no closing paren under the cocoa value chain typology. But what this does is it represents not only the different actors, which conventionally represent different links in the chain. So if we think about a supply chain, each one of these actors represents a link in the chain. So we have an independent producer, right, which we might call a smallholder farmer. They're also, again, another typo. We have farmer-based organizations, and these would be co-ops and associations. So we have the independent smallholder farmer. Then you have these farmer-based organizations. You have intermediaries that are involved in getting the cocoa from one place to another within the country, so doing logistics. People who are responsible for getting the cocoa from the port of export to the port of import. You have traders. These are people who buy and sell cocoa. Then you have large companies who take the cocoa beans and convert them into semi-finished products, derivative products. And then you have chocolate manufacturers. And so one of the things that I really value about this, and this is something that I am going to do as a part of all my future writing, and I will point to this study, right? And if you're a chocolate maker, this is one of the real values of the study. Is what you can do is you can point to it and you can say, I'm using this language because there are a lot of other people who are using this language. So we can talk about what does a farmer-based organization mean, right? And it's not just a co-op. I mean, there is a continuum, right, of what it means to be a farmer-based organization. So that, as you look to create your transparency reports, as you look to communicate, whether it's around sustainability or anything else around your business, right, having language that gets adopted, right, in a broad consensus by the industry as a whole is going to make your job really easy. And so I think that spending time thinking about this cocoa value chain typology, reading it and really understanding it, right, in pages 66 through 72 is going to be really helpful in terms of your understanding of the way the market is organized. There are also some really interesting market statistics. And so, bang, the 2019 harvest was more than 5.5 million metric tons. And I've been sort of using the 4 million metric ton. It's, maybe it was 2016, maybe it was, but now I have a number that's in a study. And when I talk about the market, I can now use 5.5 million metric tons. But what's also interesting is that in 2012, right, total losses of cocoa were on the tree. So this is related to disease, pests. I only put diseases here, but losses on the tree. So these are things that reduced yield on the farm, right? We're estimated at 1.3 million metric tons. So one of the things this suggests is that one way to reduce pressure on deforestation is to focus on improving the health of the trees, right, in order to reduce crop losses due to disease and pests. Rather than having to go and cut down new forests. I mean, it's a really interesting is that 20% roughly, right, of the cocoa crop is lost, just on the tree, on the farm, is being not harvestable and is not commercially viable. So this, I think, is again provides a way to talk about what the market is, that you can do this, that you can do this. It's a way to talk about the market that can inform the way you talk to your customers, whether they're retail customers or whether they're wholesale customers. You can have more information that you can use to talk about the market. Another thing which just blows my mind, right, which is that the market price for cocoa, so we use the New York Exchange, is that the market price adjusted for inflation has essentially remained flat over the past 25 years. Which is if the price of cocoa, forget volatility, but if you smooth out the curve, that industry is paying about as much today on an adjusted, on an inflation adjusted as they did 25 years ago. And I'm trying to think of anything, right, that is the same price now that it was 25 years ago. I mean, I go to the grocery store in January and I think about the prices on some things compared to what they were in November, and I am astonished about how prices have gone up. And it's just like, whoa, right? But for cocoa, And this is the price that the commodity exchanges have. So this affects farmer income very, very directly. Basically has remained unchanged over the course of 25 years, right? And that is not acceptable, in my opinion. Something has to be done in order to fix that problem. Another thing that this study does is you can get an idea of just what market concentration looks like. So in the cocoa market, right, 12 countries, right, represent 96% of global cocoa production. So we tend to think of Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana as being the two largest producers. We will know that Nigeria and Cameroon are again in the top 4. Indonesia will round out the top 5. We can get to countries like Brazil, maybe Ecuador and Peru will help round out the top 10, right? But 12 countries represent 96% of total production, and there are, according to ICO, last time I looked, 67 countries that produce and export cocoa, right? 9 companies, 9 processors, right, account for 60 to 80% of total grindings. And grindings is used to talk about the conversion of beans into the primary derivative products, butter and powder, right? So 9 companies represent, right, the majority of the marketplace, right? And another thing which was interesting to me is that less than or equal to 30%, right, of farmers, so independent producers, right, are organized or federated in some way among all the countries for which there is a number which is cited in the report, right? And when I am an individual farmer and I am not a part of a larger group, I have less ability to be able to influence the price that I receive for the cocoa, right? And so the fact that, even after however long the fair trade movement has been involved in cocoa, the fact that still such a small percentage of cocoa farmers are federated or organized in any kind of way is an interesting condemnation to some extent of the fact that fair trade, right? And let's forget the idea of like who decides what's fair, but there is something flawed about the system that's because if it worked and it worked well, everybody would want to do it, right? And the fact that no more than 30% on average of independent producers are federated in some way is an interesting condemnation of the organization movement within cocoa. Other things to think about is that there, is just the fact that 6 companies, right, are responsible for 40% of the retail chocolate products worldwide, right? And there's not a whole lot of overlap between the processors and the retail chocolate companies. But what you do is you have what amounts to, when you think about 40% of a $100 billion industry, retail, right? 6 companies, right, control $40 billion worth of this. It's really, really concentrated. And at $100 billion a year, I mean, chocolate is really, really tiny when you compare it with corn or sugar or oil or other commodities, right? But still, it represents an interesting bit of concentration. And one of the questions which is talked about, right, but I think needs to go into more detail. Again, this is an area where there is a reference to a study and there is no link to the study right there in the text. You have to go into the bibliography to find out that it's there. Is that this is the SEO kit study? There is a difference of opinion as to whether this market concentration is anti-competitive. Whether it discourages competition because there are big number of big companies that control prices and control the supply chain, right? Which makes intuitive sense. And then there is these questions about, okay, is this concentration, does it contribute to poverty? And so I think that this is an area I think that really, really, really needs to be looked at more closely rather than just referring to a couple of studies. Now, I don't know that this was in the purview of this research, and I don't think it was, but I think it represents an area where people can take a look at this work that's been done and go in and say, okay, to what extent is this research anti-competitive? And does concentration actually contribute to farmer poverty? I would say that it does, but the jury is out. And I want to say hello to Keith, who's joined it today. And Keith, absolutely, there are amazing reference papers. Research reports. I need to give kudos to everybody involved in putting them together. But I think that, as you point out, the lack of an executive summary, it makes it difficult. You have to actually read very, very closely the 175 pages, roughly 190 pages, 175 of each study, in order to be able to get through this and pour through quite a bit of the bibliography, the cited papers, in order to get there. And you're right, an executive summary, not conclusions. I mean, those and recommendations. These I think they're a different thing, right? So what I've been trying to do here is put together some aspects of an executive summary from an independent perspective, but an independent summary would help, or an executive summary would help guide the reader through these reports. And I think it's really, really important. And I personally understand that it's a monumental challenge, especially given the amount of time that there was available to do this. Another area which I thought, again, sort of had a little bit of implicit bias, right? And this is where I see that, the fact that perhaps, right? And again, I don't know that this was, I can't say that it was deliberate. I haven't talked to anyone, and this is something that Marianne and Marika can talk about on the 28th when they join us. Is that, to what extent did it was, the primary advisor to this was the Fine Cocoa and Chocolate Institute. And so to what extent did Fine in the FCCI and Fine in Fine Chocolate Industry Association, right, bias the language that you use in reports? And one of the places that this came up, again, it's in a section on craft and artisan on pages 75 to 77, is that the definition that FCI wants to give for what a craft or artisan chocolate maker is circular. Artisan chocolate is made by someone who can be defined as an artisan. I find that an unsatisfying definition for what's going on, right? I think more useful, right, is that, again, here we have a study. I don't know that it's the definitive study, but it's one that we could point to, and we could say, let's just adopt this idea for a broad consensus that we have a chocolate maker could be considered to be in the craft or artisan area, which is somebody who's purchasing and processing less than 200 metric tons of cocoa beans a year, right? And when it comes to market segmentation, especially because we're thinking about segments like bulk, right, and premium and ultra premium, right, that thinking about the differentiation of the market this way makes real sense. I mean, it makes more sense than, do I have to be a micro batch? Do I have to be bean to bar? Do I have to be tree to bar? I mean, all these other kinds of things. Just saying, okay, we're just going to call this craft specialty market, right, okay, under 200 metric tons of beans a year. I mean, I like to think of craft as one end of a spectrum and industrial as another end of a spectrum. And, a specialty chocolate maker can inch towards the industrial end, right? And an industrial maker can, right, move towards the craft specialty end. And a lot of it has to do, for me, about the expectations of the customer. I'm an industrial customer, or I'm an industrial chocolate maker. When my customers rely on consistency, whatever that consistency is, consistent pH, consistent rheology, consistent flavor. I mean, it is the demands for consistency on the part of my customers, which I think differentiate industrial from, artisan chocolate making. An artisan chocolate maker is someone who's got their fingers in every batch and is making decisions about the chocolate a la minute, right? And they can do it on a batch to batch to batch basis. And so that's my differentiation between the two. And I think that's more helpful, right? But I think that the other thing, which is really, really important, with all of this is to understand, just how small the craft chocolate market is. And so, the study here says that, right, no more than 10,000 metric tons, right, of cocoa are purchased and processed in the craft. So that's 10,000 over 5,500,000 metric tons. And it's actually 0.018. And so it's not 1.8%. It's smaller than that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and check that and make sure. And before I upload this presentation to thechocolatelife.com so you can download it, I'm going to go make sure that my math on that is right and that I've copied it correctly. So it's important to know that even though to the craft chocolate market segment, craft is an extremely small percentage of the total cocoa market. It's just extremely small percentage of the total chocolate market. And I think that what that suggests is that there is a struggle for growing the consumer base for craft chocolate, and that looking at the recommendations in both of these studies would be interesting to figure out, okay, how do we go about and grow the consumer base for specialty chocolate, which I prefer. I like the Specialty Coffee Association definition of specialty coffee. You have a coffee which receives a consensus rating among experts of a certain level, and it has to do with the flavor that the coffee is capable of developing after roasting in the cup. And if you get a ranking above a certain point scale, you're considered to be a specialty coffee. And what I would say is specialty chocolate is any chocolate which is made from specialty cocoa beans. And so I look at efforts like the ones which are being put together by Cocoa of Excellence, right, to be able to identify how to put together the chocolate equivalent of Q grading in coffee to form the basis of a definition for specialty chocolate. What I want to do is spend a few moments and I want to get a couple of comments that, yes, I think that there's an opportunity to have some sort of natural language processing engine go through not only the executive summary, but also the unstructured surveys which were used to generate this data, which were then interpreted into the study to be able to draw some conclusions. And so one of the reasons why I would really like I can just cut and paste all of the text out of the PDF that I want, but making the data available, the raw data available, like Kit did, so that people can go and do some analysis on this, I think is really, really, really important. And these are things that are done in other areas. I mean, as you know, this is probably Don from LinkedIn. It's okay using things like this in machine learning related to environmental, sustainable, and governance reporting, for example, in the fast fashion industry and in other industries, that being able to take these tools and use them in order to be able to pull out nuance in a way that is really, really difficult for human readers to do. I would have to go and look and see what the definition of wabi-sabi is. I don't remember it, in the nuance here. But yeah, craft chocolate is more than just wabi-sabi. And as Mark at Blue Struts points out, that yes, I'm being diplomatic when I say that the FCI definition is unsatisfying. Again, I have a problem using the word fine cocoa and chocolate, fine chocolate industry, because I think there's an inference there. And again, I don't know that it is deliberate, but for me, there's an inference that, the 99% or 95% of the cocoa, right, in the world that is not quote unquote fine comes from producers that are beneath our consideration. And I think that is not a position that can be supported, philosophically at all. And so I would like to just sort of get rid of the word fine in all of our discussions about these things. It's my own personal pet peeve, but I think it's really, really important. So, these are, 10 slides or less that cover 190 some odd page report. And so what I want to do is then go, here is the cover page for the Dominican case study. Obviously it's come from the same set of authors. And so the cover page looks very, 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 very similar. We find that this cacao trading company in Amsterdam called Gaia Cacao is the lead investigator on the study, that the USDA funded it, that the International Executive Service Corps coordinated all the work, and that the Fine Cocoa and Chocolate Institute, the Fine Cocoa and Chocolate Institute was the primary advisor. So it's really important. I know that I called this the Global Cocoa Study, USDA Global Cocoa Study. It's just shorthand because this was a lot to get onto a small slide, which was going to show up in YouTube or someplace like that. And so, but when we talk about the Dominican Republic case study, I wanted to form a similar kind of structure in terms of my presentation. So there are 10 or 12 objectives that are listed, and here are the 5 or 6 that I think are the most important, right? That if I am interested in using cocoa, right, in a chocolate product, and that cocoa comes from the Dominican Republic, I'd like to be able to talk about, the Dominican Republic. So I want to know about what the historic overview of it is. I want to know what the current market looks like. I want to know how that market has evolved over the course of the last 15 to 20 years. I want to understand what the value chain is, who the actors are in the value chain. If I'm interested in supporting farmers or other actors in the supply chain in the Dominican Republic as a maker, right, or otherwise, are there markets which are untapped that I can focus my attention on? The study also does provide some recommendations that address some of the key challenges that are presented during the course of the study. And I think that the report, as the global study did, I think that they took these objectives and they did a good job of covering them, again, given the scale of the problem or the scale of the topic that needed to be addressed. But I think the single most important thing, right, which should be considered to be a key objective of this, and it's something that I got out of the discussion around the terms of reference. So there was a couple of different documents which described what the terms of reference were. So what it was that companies who wanted to bid on the contract, things that were expected of them. And during a conference call, a Zoom call that we had with people who were interested in submitting a bid for this project, is that I think the single most important objective, and I think this is overlooked, is that this study, right, should serve as a model, right, for doing similar kinds of studies in other countries. We should be able to take the questions, we should be able to take the data structures, we should be able to take the methodology, all of these kinds of things, and use them as a rubric and a baseline for doing the same work in other studies. And by having the data organized in the same way, the same questions, right, and in the same database, when I wanted to compare, for example, the Dominican Republic with another country in the Caribbean, right, Grenada, Trinidad, or if I wanted to compare, what's going on in Colombia versus what's going on in Ecuador versus what's going on in Peru or Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, we have a rubric to do that. And because the data structures and the language that is used to define the database is the same, it makes it possible to do comparisons that are meaningful and valid. One of the major challenges in a report like this is you've got data from ICO, you've got data from FAO, you've got data from governments, you've got data from non-governmental organizations. They all have different reporting methodologies, they measure different things, they use different metrics, okay? And one of the huge challenges that you have is you go, how do I normalize this? How do I say that, in this study, we think about it this way, and in this study, we think about it another way, or it's characterized in another way, but they actually mean the same things. And so this is which really, really important to think about. And like the KIT study that was done demystifying the cocoa sector in Africa, and I'll put a link to the study in the notes for today's session, so that you can go and you can download. It's 14, 15, 16 parts, and you can download it. And then there's linked to a place where you can actually, there's a visualizer where you can go and use tools to run your own analysis on the data. And I think this is one of the key benefits of this particular study, is that by making the methodology, making the data structures, making the terminology available so that other people can do essentially the same thing in another country, I think is just one of the most useful aspects of these things. And I was sad to see that it wasn't included as a key objective. Although, if I'm wrong, please let me know that I'm wrong. So again, I believe this is Don says there is an ISO standard on this. He gives the name of the standard, and I will copy these links and references into the document from today's session, so that it's right there in the post. But this is an interesting question for the study organizers. If in the process of their methodology, did they take into account this particular international standard? Just interested in knowing. I don't know that. And then, this is something, that I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, that has been a point of contention over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, which is how much cocoa does the craft chocolate industry purchase? And this is an area of research where there is no good count of how many quote unquote craft or specialty chocolate makers there are in the world. I mean, the FCCI remains a database. I've taken a look at it. It has some data cleanliness. There are companies, the last time I looked at it, they're mentioned 2 or 3 times, and it needs to be cleaned up. I mean, I've maintained a database separately. I've looked at other databases and put them together. I get a new chocolate maker shows up in my Instagram feed almost on a daily basis. And so I don't know that we have a good handle on how many small chocolate makers there are. I think that if we have, I think the number is closer to 2,000. Although many other people say it might be 800 or 1,000, and it could be 2,500. I mean, there are a lot of small chocolate makers out there in the world. Again, if we use this 200 metric ton as a sort of the upper bound for what we're going to call these chocolate makers. So for example, that excludes Bonat, which is outside there. It excludes many, many smaller companies that might surprise you. But that 200 metric ton figure, if you were to apply that to the 2,000 or so companies, and you consider that a lot of these companies, don't even go through a bag a week. Some of them don't go through a bag a month. That 10,000 metric tons makes an enormous amount of sense when it comes to the total amount of cocoa. But I think this is an area, again, for which there is a lot more research that needs to get done. And I'm looking forward to convincing. This is an area where I've tried to convince people to fund that research, and I've yet to find it. As a matter of fact, I think it's a natural outgrowth of these 2 studies would be able to go find the funding from the USDA or some other organization and say, okay, there are big holes in this research. I think there are holes in this research, right, that represent following up. Can we do this research? And I think it would be really really important to do so. Nick asked the questions, are we seeing the start of an inevitable coalescence of standards and definitions for craft and specialty chocolate that will stick? I don't know that we are. I don't know that it is inevitable. I mean, I personally think that the phrase bean to bar is obsolete. I can go into my local drugstore here in the United States. I mean, in the UK, you'd go to Boots, or here I'd go to CVS or Duane Reade or Rite Aid, and I can buy a bar of chocolate from the US manufacturer Ghirardelli, which is owned by Lindt. And on the front of it will say, proudly bean to bar, our commitment to ultimate quality. And, so it's a term that differentiates what a specialty chocolate maker does. I think it's lost some of its usefulness. And so there is work that needs to get done. But I can tell you there was a group which wanted to be founded sort of mid 2000s, 2005, 2006, the American Craft Chocolate Association. So early people, Sean Eskenazi, Steve DeVries, Alan McClure, Art Pollard Romano, that tried to get together to create a craft chocolate association. And one of the reasons why their organizing efforts were unsuccessful is they couldn't come up with the definition of craft chocolate. Again, I think one of the ways to do this is to adopt something that has been highly successful in a closely related area, which is specialty coffee, and to be able to find a way to express that in specialty cocoa and specialty chocolate. And what it does is it now gets away from the distinction about having to do with batch size, about having to do with size of company. It says any chocolate which is made from a specialty bean is a specialty chocolate, right? In coffee, it's easy. It's, the Robusta Arabica decision differentiation is there. And we think about names: Ethiopian Mocha Dahima, Ethiopian Mocha Harar, Yirgacheffe. I mean, there's all of this work that's being done in coffee, which is less well used, marketed, understood in chocolate. And I think that that's the case. So someone asks, is there an association of craft chocolate makers? There is one in France. But there is not one in the United States. I think the Fine Chocolate Industry Association has tried to be that association in the United States. I personally don't think it's as successful after 12 or 13 years of being around as it could be. And no, there's nothing similar to the American Craft Spirits or the American Brewers Association. There's a Craft Brewers Association, but the definition of craft brewer is based on quantity. It's like 60,000 barrels, 600,000 barrels a year. I mean, right, and ownership. You can't have more than 50% outside corporate ownership and things like that. I don't necessarily know that. I don't know how useful. I mean, it's useful for people in the industry to have those things. I don't know how useful it is to the public. But one of the things which having this association around, which I think is really, really important, that is often overlooked, is that the average, so of the 2,000 craft chocolate makers, roughly, that I think are specialty chocolate makers that are out there in the world, none of them on their own have budgets, right, which enable them to market the key messages consistently around the globe, right? And, when you organize, right, as you might do through a craft brewer association or a craft spirits association, I think that most of the money should be used to be able to develop marketing messages which members can adopt, which enable them to communicate clearly and consistently. And this is one of the things that can be pulled out of these two studies. There is language that can be extracted that could form the basis of that consistent communication. My personal belief is that if the industry doesn't know how to define what bean to bar is, right, there is some difference of opinion about what that means. If we as chocolate makers don't know what that means, if we don't know what craft means, we don't know what artisan means, the average consumer has got to be confused as heck, right? And, addressing that is going to be a really, really interesting challenge. That one of the things that I am hoping is that there will be some work done to extract some of those marketing messages out of these two reports, right? Because I think, for me, I'm not really interested in the pricing dynamics of the difference between cocoa butter and cocoa powder and how they're traded. That's not of interest to me. There are people who will read the study for whom it's extremely interesting, especially when we can compare, how much supply versus how much the demand is there is in a different country, in a different region, and where they can focus their sourcing efforts or their marketing efforts. It's like, there's a shortage. Is Nigeria a cocoa exporting company, or are they a net exporting, net importing company? And where is the difference between what they're growing and what they're exporting and what they're importing? having that information, which is in the global cocoa study, it's there for anybody who wants to take a look at it, will be really important for me to help me understand strategy. If you're a small chocolate maker and what you want to do is you want to move out of chocolate bars into a commercial couverture product, something which is designed to be used by others to make products as opposed to selling it to them as finished bars, then I think that in both the Dominican study and the global cocoa study, there's a lot of information that can be pulled out of there that can help you organize, the products that you want to make and what markets are likely to be receptive to those products. I think it's really, really, it's there, but it requires a good deal of work on the reader's part in order to be able to pull it out. Again, yeah, craft is really, really hard to define. Right. And the point that you make, at the end of the day, the consumer who has defined what craft is, right, and has every right to define it, is absolutely right. I mean, as a critic of chocolate, right, my approach has completely changed over the course of the last 15, 20 years. And rather than trying to convince people that my taste is the best, right, that I know what I'm doing, I'm the expert, pay attention to me. My goal is to help people understand what it is about the things that they like. I mean, they're the one who's eating it. I don't have to eat it, right? So I can more objectively stand back and I can say, this is a well-made piece of its kind, right? And so I can say, technically, is it a well-made piece? Is it a good exemplar of the class of things that it's trying to be? And those things are entirely different from, does it taste good and do I like it, right? And so my criticism, if people have paid attention to what it is that I'm writing, the way my writing has changed over the course since Discover Chocolate was published in 2007, is that I've stopped trying to take an individual chocolate and explain the flavor profile of that particular chocolate, right? Because every single one of us has our own sense of taste. Every single one of us has our own sense of smell. We all come from different food culture backgrounds, and all of those things are going to influence what we taste when we put a piece of chocolate in our mouth. And it's not about what I like. It's about what you like. And, absolutely, part of the challenge is it's like the definition for quality. Quality is a basket of attributes. Everybody's basket has a different set of attributes, and we attribute value to each one of these attributes differently, right? And so ultimately, quality, right, is defined by what I'm willing to pay for something. I pull my wallet out, this is what I'm willing to pay for, and that defines what quality is for me. It's not about good quality or bad quality. It's about what my definition of quality is. And that applies to craft and applies to a bunch of other things, right? To some extent, this is a cut and paste of the key strengths of the study from the global cocoa study. I mean, again, it is a common reference. Everybody can download that's freely available. I think that the terminology, the glossary, key terms and definitions, if we as an industry, and I think especially in terms of small chocolate makers, this craft market of under 200 metric tons a year, if what we can do is we can coalesce around these definitions and use them consistently, that absolutely, this is going to be really, really beneficial for the industry as a whole, to be able to have a set of terms that we use consistently in our marketing messages, whether it's on the web or on the label, whatever, or when we talk about it, so that we can reduce consumer confusion, right? Really, really important, I think, that is it. If you look through it, there are similarities between the Global Cocoa Study and the Dominican Republic case study. So this study builds on the foundation. And so if you've read one, you'll be familiar with a lot of the concepts, and you go, oh, here's how we would take the Global Cocoa Study and make it work with respect to the Dominican Republic. One of the things that I found important, right, is that when you think about, who are the producers, who are the exporters, who are the traders, who are the manufacturers, who are the grinders. I mean, the study names companies that are involved in each one of these segments in the Dominican Republic. So it helps understand what the landscape is internally. And if you had this for every country, fabulous. I mean, oh my gosh, would that be valuable to be able to do, especially when somebody's going in and they're trying to source cocoa more directly. It would be really, really helpful. There's also this really, really fascinating discussion of productivity by segment of the market down there. So it's productivity by education, productivity by age, productivity by size of farm, really, really interesting. And I really recommend people go look at that and sort of understand what the nuance is. And again, the key strength of this is it serves as a baseline for other studies in other countries. And that is weaknesses. Again, there's no executive summary up the front, as I mentioned, for the global cocoa study. There's no access to the raw numbers underneath the charts. I'm hoping that the organizers will find a way to be able to share them, because I want to be able to put them into data mining programs and database programs and go take a look at, can I determine underlying patterns, and be able to do some research that would help me as a consultant, right? That I could talk to my clients about them. There are some tables which will appear to exist in the global study and the Dominican Republic study. It's not obvious that there is a direct comparison between the two. And again, if we were to go and take a look at doing this study on the DR and replicating it in a bunch of other countries, to be able to say, okay, here's the global study and here's the delta, here's the difference between the global study and the Dominican Republic or the Grenada, or pick an origin, incredibly helpful. And so it's one thing that, even if there were, some tables that did this, if I didn't have the underlying data, this I thought was an opportunity which was missed. May not have been in the terms of reference. So it was not something that was, was put together, but I think it's an opportunity which was missed. And, we may know that there's this graphic of a cocoa bar, of a chocolate bar, and it says, 6% or 3% or whatever amount is the amount that the farmer gets, right? Which is, again, I think it was at least 10 years old. It may be older than that. And it's very, very generic. But there's this fabulous table where they talk about costs. Again, it's within this productivity area where they talk about the cost of growing and the cost about getting the cocoa to the factory door, but they don't actually talk about the actual cost of manufacturing, the cost of distribution, and retail prices. Really, really hard to do. It may not have been, again, a part of the terms of reference, but I think that there is a lost opportunity to be able to go in and be able to redo that antiquated and out-of-date chocolate bar graphic, which says, okay, here's how much a farmer earns compared with what it is that compared to what every other actor in the chain, according to the typology that is set out, right? It would be really, really valuable. Again, right? It may not have been in the terms of reference. I think it's a lost opportunity that didn't get done, right? So I think one of the key market statistics about the Dominican Republic, and so, generally something that's, again, I didn't go look at specifically, but the Dominican Republic produces roughly 4% of the world's cocoa, but last I heard they produce roughly 40% of the world's organically certified cocoa, right? But, I'd need to go verify it to find out whether that, in fact, that is still the case. But in any event, when we look at cocoa that comes from the Dominican Republic that's sold into the specialty and ultra premium markets, so makers who buy it at prices above $6 a kilo, that still represents less than 1% of the total cocoa, which is sold from the Dominican Republic, indicating that even though the Dominican Republic is a well-liked origin, it represents a really, really tiny percentage. So even after, we're 25 years after the founding of Scharfenberger, right? Even after 20, we've gone from one maker to over 2,000 makers. That still, so this less than 1%. What's 1% of 10,000 metric tons? 100 metric tons. That's not very much when you think about it, right? I mean, that's on average, but you get the idea. It's a relatively small percentage. We're running overly long. We've had a couple of really, really good comments, but there are some things that I'd like to discuss next on Friday the 28th during the next session, specifically about the Dominican Republic study. Is there a table 38 on page 80 of the report suggests there are some counterintuitive findings about the payment of the organic premium. And so I think that although there is a discussion of it in the report, it's something that I'd like to talk about next Friday, because everybody says premiums, which come from certification in one form or another, are important. And the question is, in what way are they important? And this might be different from the Dominican Republic because we have two different, generically two different quality of beans. We have Sanchez, which would be an unfermented, unwashed. So it's not lavado, which you would get from Mexico, but you have Sanchez and Hispaniola. So the Hispaniola by definition is fermented and Sanchez is unfermented. So that the organic premium is different for these four segments. So it would be interesting to discuss what that means. There is this exploration of the value chain with tables 41 through 45, which looks at the typology of who the actors are in each segment of the chain and what is the distribution of value. So what percentage, and it changes, to what percent is the cost of cocoa in terms of getting the product to the door of the chocolate maker in the bulk market, as opposed to the ultra premium market. I mean, it's really interesting if you're at all interested as a trader or broker understanding, or as a buyer understanding how your cocoa is classified and how that classification will have an impact on the margin that you get. Is really, really an interesting discussion to go look in. It's in tables 41 through 45. There is a very, very short discussion about child exploitation on page 106 of the report. Again, because it's such a huge issue for many, many people, I don't know that the discussion about it is nuanced enough or goes into it deep enough. And then there's a very, very long discussion about the living income reference price, and this is this is based, I think, on work that has come out of fair trade. I've seen similar kinds of calculations and assumptions in the fair trade pricing model. But I am really intrigued by the notion that if I have a small farm, 2.2 hectares, that the living income reference price for cocoa is $4.50 a kilo, assuming I think it's 800 kilos per hectare productivity, right? But then that living income reference price goes down to $2.75 a kilo. Again, these are farm gate prices. If I have a 5-hectare farm. And this is an area which I think is, ripe for a lot of discussion and really, real interesting understanding. Because one of the things is it says, it uses the term decent. This is a decent living. And they're all compared to US dollar prices, right? And, and you're trying to get what the local standard of living is compared with the United States. And I got to tell you, living in New York, the living income right in New York City is really different from the living income in the Ozarks of Missouri. And so I think it's a real challenge when we try to put these models together, in part because the people who are creating the models, they're the ones who are deciding what decent means. And I think there's a structural deficiency there, right, in doing that. And so I want to say, that is the end of my presentation on these topics today. What I will do is, in reading through this, I have said there are a couple of typos, and there's a number that I need to fix to make sure that I understand what it is. What I will do is I will update the presentation, re-PDF it, and re-upload it to the Chocolate Life. And so if you go to this page that you are looking at right now, let me do this. So if you go to this page on the Chocolate Life right now, this is where all of the information about today's live stream is going to be archived. So in future, if what you want to do is you want to be able to watch this on YouTube, you can click right on this link that says the Chocolate Wire channel on YouTube, and you can go to the archived video on YouTube. If you're watching it on Facebook, you'll be able to watch it in the Chocolate Life page on Facebook, and on LinkedIn, it's published to my personal profile. And so this is a place where you can go look at the archive here. I maintain a calendar, right? So if I were to go to the homepage of the Chocolate Life, there's a calendar, right? This calendar says here are upcoming rooms, right? And here is the archive to all past rooms. So it's a really, really quick and interesting way to be able to go find things that are, everything that this Chocolate Life live stream is doing. In February, I'm going to be going to 2 days a week. I'm going to go Tuesday and Friday. Tuesday is going to be focused on makers and cocoa growers. So we're going to be talking to people at origin. We're going to talk about making chocolate. We're going to talk about cocoa growers. That's going to be the focus of Tuesdays going forward. And on Fridays, the discussion is going to be these larger general topics of politics, economics, and things like that. And so, I'm really, really happy with the way this experiment on StreamYard has gone. So moving from Clubhouse to StreamYard, being able to do these videos as opposed to audio only sessions has been adopted, and what people like about them, and really, really happy about that. Finally, what I want to do is also say, if you go, for example, to last week's stream about learning to take chocolate, there's a comment section at the bottom. There are no comments on this particular session here on the Chocolate Life. But if you do want to add a comment, you do need to be a member of the Chocolate Life. And so if you want to be a member of the Chocolate Life, you can, and you're not a member, you can click on the join link. There is a free category. You can, so you can join for free, but there are also some premium categories as well. And what you'd like to do is you'd like to put together a yearly payment plan or a monthly payment plan. There is a list of the perks that you get and for each one of these payment plans. You support the work that I do here on the Chocolate Life, keeping the lights on, paying for hosting, paying for special services, software, all the things that are necessary to keep a community going and to keep a community growing. And so I'd like to thank you all there. I'd also like to let everybody know that if you look at this tag here, it says live stream. That's another way to be able to go and find the archive of all of these live streams that I've been doing here on StreamYard. Finally, to say thank you very much, Marika, who's one of the principal investigators on the project. Marika, I hope it was interesting for you to get my opinion, some of the reports, and I am really, really looking forward to sitting down with you and Mariana 2 Fridays from today. I will send you the presentation so that you can, you'll be able to download it yourself, but, having a dialogue over the course of the next 2 weeks so that we can go and take a look at them. And I want to say, again, thank you very much for the vote of confidence from Teresa today. And with that, like, subscribe, share, comment, join the Chocolate Life. And I look forward to seeing many of you back here next Friday and Fridays in the future, and to talk about cocoa and chocolate and your interest in it and our combined interest to make sure that this thing that we all share in common, this love that we all share in common, is one that we can work to understanding better and to increasing awareness overall above just our appreciation of chocolate. And with that, ciao everybody. See you next Friday and future Fridays.